Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Sunlight streamed gently through the tall, stained glass windows of the Blossom Cathedral, illuminating the polished floors with soft hues of rose and gold. Charity Blossom stood before the mirror in her bridal suite, her figure clad in an ivory lace gown that seemed to have been made for royalty. The delicate neckline curved over her collarbone, and a subtle tiara nestled into her neatly pinned coils. "I still can't believe today is finally here," she said softly, her voice laced with awe as she looked at her reflection. Tanya, her best friend since university, stood behind her with a forced smile, adjusting the hem of the veil. "You deserve this day, Char," she replied. "You deserve everything good." Charity turned to face her, oblivious to the tightening grip Tanya had on the fabric. "I'm lucky to have you by my side. Jerry and I never thought a man like him would fall for someone like me." Tanya chuckled, biting the inside of her cheek. "Life is full of surprises." Downstairs, Jerry Carson paced the length of the aisle alone. The Grand Cathedral was nearly set. The blossoms were imported from Italy, and the elite of Lagos had started arriving. But Jerry's mind wasn't on the ceremony. His gaze drifted to his phone again, checking for a message that hadn't come. When he heard footsteps, he quickly slipped the phone away and smiled as Charity's mother approached. "She's almost ready," the older woman beamed. "We're all proud of you, Jerry." He nodded, mouthing a polite, "Thank you." But behind his smile was a storm. Everything about this wedding felt suffocating, forced, final. He had once loved Charity, but love had twisted into obligation. Worse, his heart now belonged to someone else, someone who had just texted him from the hotel suite they secretly shared. "Make it fast. I feel sick." That someone was Tanya. As Jerry looked back at the grand altar, he felt the weight of legacy, of expectation, and of the plan he couldn't back out from. Because after today, Charity Blossom wouldn't be anyone's bride. She wouldn't be anything at all. The corridor outside Tanya's hotel suite smelled faintly of rose oil and something else, nerves. Jerry knocked twice and entered without waiting. Inside, Tanya sat in a silk robe, legs curled beneath her, her face pale despite the makeup. She looked up sharply. "You're late," she said, her voice clipped. "The rehearsal ended hours ago." Jerry shut the door behind him and sighed. "I had to walk her to the car. Her mother was watching." He reached for Tanya's hand, but she pulled it away. "Jerry, I can't keep doing this. This lie, this act. I'm pregnant." "Do you even understand what that means?" Her voice broke mid-sentence. Jerry crouched before her, hands on her knees. "Tanya, listen to me. Everything will be over soon, I promise. This marriage won't happen. Charity won't. She won't be in our way anymore." Tanya stood, brushing past him to the window, staring at the glow of the city beyond. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" she asked, arms crossed over her chest. "You keep speaking in riddles." Jerry walked toward her slowly. "There's a plan. Just trust me. Tomorrow, everything changes." He hesitated before continuing. "Someone's going to make sure she doesn't show up. After that, we can be together. No more hiding. No more guilt." Tanya turned to him, her voice suddenly hollow. "And what happens when her family starts asking questions? When the world wants answers?" Jerry kissed her forehead, his jaw tight. "Let me worry about that. You just take care of our baby." Her eyes searched his face for reassurance, but found only shadows. Somewhere deep inside, fear nestled in her ribs. Jerry had always been calculated, but this wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was danger. Still, she nodded. "Fine, but you better be right. Because if you're not, we'll both lose everything." Charity stood alone on the Blossom Group rooftop, her gown fluttering gently in the evening wind. She'd received an anonymous message to meet Jerry there, said it was urgent, private. The city stretched endlessly around her, golden lights flickering like distant stars. She clutched her phone, confused and a little breathless. "Jerry?" she called out, turning toward the stairwell door. A figure emerged, not Jerry, but someone cloaked in black with their face partially covered. Panic rose in her throat. "Who are you?" "What is this?" she demanded, stepping back. The figure didn't respond, only raised a hand and tossed a phone toward her feet. On the screen, a video started playing, Jerry and Tanya laughing together in bed. Her heart dropped. Before she could scream, footsteps echoed behind her, Jerry. "Charity, I can explain," he started, voice tight with something that sounded like regret or fear. "Explain. Jerry, what is this? Why would you?" Her words caught in her throat as Tanya suddenly stepped out from the shadows, her heels clicking against the concrete. "You always thought you were so perfect," Tanya spat, venom dripping from every word. "This saint of Blossom Group, but perfection is boring." Charity stumbled back, now at the very edge of the rooftop, the wind clawing at her veil. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, tears in her eyes. Jerry looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, Char," he muttered, stepping closer. It happened in seconds, a scuffle, a push, a scream swallowed by the wind. Charity's body plunged into the darkness below, her gown flaring like wings. Tanya gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh my God. Jerry, what have we done?" Jerry stood frozen, eyes fixed on the edge. "It's done," he said coldly. "Let's just make sure she stays gone." 3 days later, Blossom Group's boardroom buzzed with murmurs of grief and uncertainty. Jerry, dressed in an all-black designer suit, stood at the head of the long mahogany table. Cameras had captured him earlier delivering a shaky eulogy at the memorial service, but now his voice was calm, even. "Charity wished for me to manage her family's interests in her absence," he said, placing a forged letter on the table. "Until a new heir is appointed, I'll serve as interim CEO." An older board member, Mr. Adedayo, squinted at the document. "And this," came from her hand directly. Jerry nodded solemnly. "The week before the wedding. She was nervous about handling too much. She trusted me." The room fell silent, uncertain. But with the patriarch of the Blossom family in poor health and no direct challengers, the motion passed. Jerry now had power. Meanwhile, Tanya wept into a silk handkerchief for the cameras outside the Blossom mansion. "She was my sister in spirit," she whispered to a journalist. "I've never known a more beautiful soul." The lie slid off her tongue like honey. But behind closed doors, she was already clearing Charity's things from the master bedroom. "I can't sleep here with her perfume on the sheets," she complained. Jerry, meanwhile, instructed lawyers to consolidate holdings, move assets, and tighten control. The walls of Blossom Group began shifting from legacy to leverage. Charity's portraits were taken down, replaced by new branding with Tanya subtly featured beside Jerry in public events. "The people need to see we're moving forward," Jerry told the PR team. "We owe them progress." No one suspected the truth, not yet. And those who did whisper had no proof. For all the world knew, Charity Blossom had vanished from history, leaving her empire in the hands of the man she trusted most. But Jerry didn't know one thing: history has teeth, and ghosts don't always stay buried. The current had carried her body downstream for nearly 30 hours before fishermen discovered her near the muddy banks of Ajuma River. Her face was unrecognizable, swollen, scraped, and half-burned from a suspicious chemical that had been poured onto her clothes. But she was breathing, barely. The hospital in that rural town was ill-equipped for such trauma, yet the nurses treated her with urgency. They wrapped her in gauze and whispered among themselves, wondering who she might be. No identification, no phone, no purse, only a disfigured wedding dress, burned beyond recognition. She drifted in and out of consciousness for days, a lifeline tethered to tubes and beeping monitors. On the 4th night, her fingers twitched and her eyes fluttered open. "Where am I?" she rasped, her voice like dry paper. "You're safe now," a kind-faced nurse whispered, leaning closer. "You're in Ajuma General Hospital. You were found by the river." The woman blinked, trying to sit up, but her body trembled violently. "Do you remember your name?" the nurse asked. Silence. Then the woman shook her head weakly. The doctors called it trauma-induced amnesia. In truth, her mind was fogged in pain and fragments, shouts, a sharp push, cold air, and endless water. When asked for a name, she whispered, "Ella. I think it's Ella." The nurse nodded, scribbling it into her chart. Over the next few weeks, she healed slowly. Her face, though altered by injury and the procedures that followed, began to form new contours. Skin grafts, scar reduction, a new softness in the jawline. She didn't look like herself, whoever that self had been. And no visitors came, not once. The staff assumed she had no one. But deep inside her, buried under trauma and silence, lay the ember of a memory that hadn't been extinguished, only waiting for the wind to rise again. Tanya stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror, wrapped in a rose gold designer dress that shimmered like starlight. "Make it tighter," she ordered the stylist. "It has to scream elegance." Her new role as Blossom Group's co-face demanded visual precision. With Charity officially out of the picture, the public image had to evolve, and Tanya had every intention of making sure it centered around her. At the press conference later that day, Jerry proudly announced their engagement. Flashes from camera bulbs bounced across the backdrop as reporters hurled questions. Was the engagement too soon after the tragedy? One dared to ask. Tanya tilted her head, all gentle poise. Charity was my sister. She would have wanted the company to thrive. Jerry and I are honoring her by building a stronger future together. Lies had become her language now, sweet, poisonous lies. Behind the scenes, she was ruthless. Department heads were shuffled, board members replaced with loyal faces. Charity's loyalists found themselves conveniently demoted or offered sudden early retirements. "Clean the past so the future doesn't trip over it," she told Jerry one evening as they toasted champagne. He chuckled. "You sound like your own PR slogan." She smiled, touching her flat stomach. "Well, I'm going to be a mother soon. I want our child to inherit a kingdom, not a scandal." He nodded, though something in him recoiled at the mention of children. He wasn't ready, not truly, but it was too late to confess that. Tanya, intoxicated by power, began redesigning the Blossom brand. Fresher colors, newer slogans, a woman-led legacy. "Blossom, the future is now," the posters read, with her face subtly in the corner. But even in her success, she couldn't shake the chill on her neck at night. Some dreams whispered with water, falling, screaming. But she would silence them with diamonds, board votes, and perfectly staged smiles. After all, the dead don't return. Or so she thought. The nights were the worst. Ella lay on the hospital cot in her shared recovery room, the sterile white ceiling offering no answers. Her dreams were full of chaos, gowns soaked in blood, lips murmuring apologies, a scream echoing against glass. She would jolt awake, gasping, drenched in sweat, clutching her sheets. "It's just the trauma," the psychiatrist would say. Amnesia sometimes protects the mind from what it cannot yet handle. But she knew it was more than that. These weren't random images. They felt lived. She didn't just see water, she felt the impact. Her bones remembered the plunge. Her chest clenched with grief she could not name. "Why would someone do this to me?" she whispered one night, voice trembling. "What kind of life did I have?" The nurse beside her only offered a half smile, refilling her IV. One worth surviving for. The hospital staff had grown used to her silence, but Christopher hadn't. A volunteer in the small hospital's transport unit, he first noticed her while delivering blood samples to the ward. At first, it was just curiosity, the odd scar across her shoulder, her guarded eyes, the way she flinched when people touched her. But it was the way she pronounced Ella that stuck in his head. She said it like it wasn't her name, like she was borrowing it. And one day, while dropping off supplies, he caught a glimpse of her standing by the window, her profile bathed in sunlight. That's when he saw it. The small scar beneath her jawline, right below her left ear. His breath hitched. He'd driven Charity Blossom for 3 years. He'd seen that scar every morning as she adjusted her earrings in the back seat. It couldn't be, but it was. He said nothing then, just stared, and the only thought echoing in his mind was, "She's not supposed to be alive." Christopher sat on a rusted bench behind the hospital's supply building, staring at his half-eaten bread roll as thoughts swirled violently in his mind. He hadn't told anyone, not even the head nurse, what he suspected. For 2 weeks, he'd quietly observed her from a distance. Every movement, every glance reminded him more of the woman he once drove through crowded city streets, the woman who offered him tea on rainy mornings and never made him feel like a servant. But the face was different now, subtly. The skin around her eyes had healed tighter, the nose more angled, the voice hoarser. Still, the scar beneath her ear hadn't changed, and neither had the slight inward curl of her left pinky finger, a habit she had when deep in thought. He couldn't ignore it any longer. I need to talk to her, he muttered to himself, grabbing his jacket. That evening, he knocked softly at her door, pretending to be replacing her IV fluids. She looked at him with weary eyes, suspicious but not alarmed. "Do I know you?" she asked after a long pause. He forced a small smile. "No, but I think I know you." Her brows furrowed. "They call me Ella," she said cautiously. Christopher sat down, lowering his voice. "You used to be someone else, someone important. I worked for the Blossom family. I think you're Charity Blossom." Her eyes widened, panic rippling beneath her skin. "That name? Why does it feel like a wound?" she whispered, gripping the bedsheet. He leaned closer. "I can help you remember. But we have to be careful. If what I think happened, you weren't just forgotten, you were erased." Her breathing quickened. She wanted to deny it, to scream at him to leave, but something in her soul leaned toward him like a compass, finally pointing north. "If that's true," she murmured, "then someone tried to kill me." Christopher nodded solemnly. "And they think they succeeded." It was raining lightly as Tanya stepped into the mausoleum built for Charity. The air inside was damp and perfumed with lilies, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She had made it a habit to come here once a month, not out of guilt or grief, but control. "Hello, darling," she said mockingly, walking up to the tombstone etched with Charity's name. "Still quiet, I see." She smirked as she knelt and cleaned the frame of the candlelit altar, brushing away imaginary dust. "You should see what I've done with your company. Your fiancé and I, we make a brilliant team." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes burned with spite. "You were always so polished, so adored. But I was the one cleaning up your mistakes behind closed doors. Now look who's resting, and look who's rising." Unbeknownst to her, a motion-triggered camera hidden inside a decorative flower pot recorded every word. Christopher had planted it days before, suspecting that guilt would eventually loosen Tanya's tongue. Back in the city, Christopher played the footage over and over again in his small apartment, zooming in on her smug expression. "She's practically dancing on her grave," he muttered bitterly. Meanwhile, Ella, now knowing her real name but still too afraid to claim it, watched in stunned silence. "That's my best friend?" she asked, disbelief twisting her face. "She buried me with no tears," Christopher nodded, "and celebrated your funeral like a party." Ella shook her head. "Then why do I still feel broken when I look at her? How could someone who knew my childhood turn into this?" He turned to her gently. "Because envy doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles until you trust it." Ella clenched her fists, something flickering behind her eyes, not quite rage, but resolve. "If I was erased, then I'll rewrite myself. But I'm not walking through that front door as the same woman who fell." Christopher glanced at her quietly. "Then who will you become?" she exhaled. "Someone they'll never see coming." Christopher spent the entire night typing out a carefully worded letter. Every sentence was precise, cautious, and meant to rattle Jerry without exposing too much. He signed it anonymously and mailed it straight to the Blossom Group's private legal office. Inside the envelope, he enclosed still images from the mausoleum footage and a note that read, "The dead don't always stay buried. Prepare for her return." But the letter never reached its intended destination. A junior intern intercepted it the next morning, and, overwhelmed by the confidential stamp and lack of address, handed it straight to Jerry. Jerry scanned the contents once, his face stiffening as he reached the final line. "Who sent this?" he barked. The intern shrugged helplessly. "There's no name, no return address." Jerry tore the envelope apart in rage and threw it into the fireplace in his office. The flames swallowed the images, but not the fear. Later that day, he slammed the door of his penthouse behind him and grabbed Tanya by the arm. "Did you go back there again?" he demanded. She blinked in surprise. "What are you talking about?" "The mausoleum. Someone recorded you. And they sent it to my office." Her eyes widened, genuine panic lacing her voice. "I thought it was safe." "I didn't see anyone," he cut her off. "You're careless. We cannot afford any mistakes now." She folded her arms tightly. "Maybe if you hadn't left the body where it could be found. It was burned." "She's dead," he roared. "No one survives a fall like that." Tanya, shaken, looked away. "Then why are we still scared?" Silence hung between them. For the first time since Charity's disappearance, the illusion of control cracked. "We stick to the plan," Jerry said at last, his voice quieter but colder. "No more visits, no more slips. This wedding has to happen. Then everything will be sealed. Permanently." But neither of them noticed the envelope's ash smudged beneath his desk, or the tiny embedded chip that hadn't burned at all. It was during a cold morning thunderstorm that Ella unearthed the necklace. The nurses had returned her belongings in a small, sealed bag, mostly shredded remnants of the gown she wore the night she was found. She almost threw them away until her finger grazed a small inner seam stitched behind the dress lining. She tugged at the thread with care, and something fell into her palm. A silver chain rusted slightly at the clasp, but unmistakably intact. Hanging from it was a heart-shaped pendant, engraved delicately on the back, "To my future wife, Jerry." She stared at it for what felt like hours, a rising tide of nausea twisting her insides. Her hands trembled as she traced the letters again and again, as if they would rewrite themselves. A memory jolted through her chest like lightning, him fastening that very chain around her neck, whispering, "You'll always be mine." The echo made her recoil. She ran to the bathroom mirror, yanked off the bandages beneath her ear, and studied the scar, the one Christopher had mentioned. The same scar she once hated in her youth, that only one man ever called beautiful. She leaned closer, and that's when the dam inside her cracked. Not all at once, but with sharp, aching fragments. The memory of a rooftop. The scream that got caught in her throat. The push, Tanya's voice laced with venom. Jerry's hesitation before he let go. She dropped to her knees, her cries muffled by the storm outside. Later, Christopher found her curled in the corner, clutching the necklace like a relic. "I remember," she whispered without looking up. "Not everything, but enough to know they tried to end me." He crouched beside her, hand firm on her shoulder. "Then it's time we stop surviving in the shadows. But we'll do this smart. You're not walking in as Charity Blossom." She looked at him slowly, voice cold and hollow. "No, she died that night. I'll go back as someone else. Someone they won't see coming." She gripped the pendant tighter. "And I'll take everything they tried to steal, one lie at a time." 2 weeks later, Ella, now legally rebranded as Marian Otakpa, stepped out of a modest black cab in front of Blossom Group's main headquarters. Her once soft curls had been straightened and dyed into a copper hue. Her cheekbones were more defined, thanks to the reconstructive surgery that had corrected part of her facial damage. Contact lenses shaded her once dark eyes a clear hazel, and her accent, now carefully adjusted with therapy, carried a northern inflection that made her nearly unrecognizable, even to those closest to the real her. She wore a dark blue blouse, high-waisted trousers, and low heels, professional, muted, forgettable. She clutched a brown folder to her chest, which contained her forged resume and references, all backed by real credentials Christopher quietly helped her acquire. Her new identity was airtight. The receptionist barely looked up as she approached. "Good morning. I'm here for the legal compliance internship," she said smoothly. "Name? Marian Otakpa." The name came out effortlessly, but her pulse quickened. Moments later, she was escorted to the HR department. As she sat in the waiting lounge, she saw a framed portrait of Jerry and Tanya mounted on the far wall, laughing, radiant, confident. Her stomach twisted. The HR officer, a brisk middle-aged woman with glasses, called her name. "Miss Otakpa, follow me." Marian stood and entered the glass-paneled interview room where the scent of lavender and coffee mixed unnaturally. The questions came rapid-fire, background, schooling, prior experience. She answered them all with quiet precision. The officer gave a nod of approval. "We'll start you on probation under the corporate legal analyst. If your reports check out, we'll make it permanent." Just like that, Marian was in. Later that day, she sat at her new cubicle, surrounded by strangers and ghost memories. Jerry walked past her once, too distracted by his phone to glance her way. Still, her breath hitched. She wasn't ready for eye contact, not yet. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. And it would begin, not with exposure, but with observation. "You don't strike from the surface," she murmured to herself as she typed her first email. "You strike when no one remembers the water still holds breath." By the second week of her internship, Marion had settled into Blossom Group's system like a ghost in the machine. She moved quietly, took notes during meetings, stayed late when no one asked her to. Her supervisor, an overworked legal manager named Mrs. Okonkwo, praised her diligence, even letting her sit in on sensitive compliance audits. This gave her access to old legal contracts, pre-merger files, and private boardroom transcripts. But nothing shook her more than the memo she read late one evening, an internal update about Jerry and Tanya's upcoming wedding. All staff invited to the evening reception, it read, in celebration of Blossom Group's new legacy. Marion stared at the words for a long time. Her hands began to sweat. They really went through with it, she whispered. They really killed me, and set a date to celebrate it. Her desk mate, a bright-eyed analyst named Temi, glanced over. You okay? Marion nodded quickly. Just processing numbers. When she returned to her tiny apartment later that night, she collapsed onto the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Christopher sat across from her, sipping water. You found something? He asked. She sat up slowly and slid the memo across the table. His face tightened. They're getting married next month. Publicly. That'll make everything look legitimate legally, morally, emotionally. Marion rubbed her temples. I can't believe I was planning a life with him, and he was planning a funeral. Her voice cracked, but no tears came. And Tanya? She looked me in the eyes for years and called me sister. Christopher leaned forward. You're not going to let them win, are you? She shook her head. Not anymore. I'm not here to cry, I'm here to reclaim. After a beat of silence, she whispered, But I can't say my name yet. Not even to myself. Christopher stood, walking to the window. Then don't, he said. Names have power. Use theirs for now. Keep yours as your weapon. She nodded slowly, staring at her reflection. Marion may work for them, but charity will bury them. Tanya tapped impatiently at her office desk, flipping through partnership briefs she couldn't seem to focus on. Something had been gnawing at her since last week, an itch at the back of her mind she couldn't reach. It started with a glance. A fleeting moment in the hallway where a new intern looked at her, not with awe like the rest, but with eerie familiarity. It wasn't the face, it was the posture, the way her head tilted when reading, the way she clenched her left hand when frustrated. She caught herself watching the girl, Marion, they said, one afternoon in the staff lounge. Marion had been laughing with another intern, but the laughter was soft, measured, restrained. Just like Charity's. You okay? Jerry asked, walking into the lounge and handing Tanya a smoothie. She blinked. Fine, just overworked. But her eyes flickered back to Marion, who had now glanced in their direction and quickly turned away. Later that night, Tanya sat on her vanity stool at home, removing her makeup in slow circles. You ever look at someone and feel like they know something you forgot to hide? She asked quietly. Jerry, stretched on the bed behind her, didn't even glance up from his tablet. Who now? That intern, Marion. She reminds me of Charity. Jerry finally looked up. You're still thinking about her? He snapped. You buried that woman. You won. Let it go. Tanya stood slowly and walked to the window. What if we didn't bury her deep enough? Her reflection stared back at her, painted, perfect, and hollow. I've been feeling. Watched. Jerry scoffed. We're public figures, Tan. Get used to it. But his voice wasn't firm. It wavered just enough to reveal that he too had felt a shift. Neither admitted it aloud, but the past wasn't staying buried. It was shifting beneath their feet like something rising, slow, patient, and deliberate. Across the city, Marion circled a date in her hidden notebook, May 12th, the day of their wedding. She pressed the pen into the page so hard it bled through. Marion moved through the archives with practiced precision, armed with access codes Christopher had gathered from his old company credentials. The legal department's digital backups were thorough, but it was the off-grid security tapes she was searching for, specifically the private rooftop footage from the week of her death. She waited until midnight, when most of the staff had gone home, and slipped into the surveillance subroom on the 9th floor. A creaky storage cabinet held labeled drives from years past. She combed through the folders until her fingers found one marked, Roof C Wedding Week. Her heart pounded as she loaded the footage into a hidden laptop. The screen flickered to life. There she was, alive. in her wedding dress. Then came the confrontation. Muffled movements. A blurred scuffle. Jerry's arm raised. The footage glitched. Then a final frame, her body tipping over the ledge. Marion's breath caught, her palms pressed tightly over her mouth. She rewound the clip again and again, but the audio was corrupted, and the footage cut off seconds before her fall. It wasn't enough for police action, not yet, but it was irrefutable proof to her. "He let me die," she whispered, her voice raw. And she watched. Christopher sat beside her, silent, but his fists clenched. "The world doesn't know what they're celebrating," he said. "But they will." Marion closed the laptop and leaned back, eyes burning with unshed tears. "No, not yet. Let them build the stage. Let them invite the world. I want everyone to be watching when their kingdom collapses." She stood slowly. "They think the dead can't see. But I've seen everything." Christopher looked at her with growing awe and fear. "You're not the same woman I drove around for 3 years." Marion turned, the faintest smile on her lips. "That's because she died. But I didn't stay dead long enough to stay weak." Morning light poured through the blinds of Marion's apartment as she stood before the mirror, wrapped in a cream robe, studying herself without blinking. Her reflection no longer felt foreign. It felt earned. The angular lines of her reconstructed face carried resilience, not vanity. The once scattered fragments of her identity were now aligned into something sharp, measured. "Say it," she whispered to herself, the words catching in her throat. "Say your name." Her lips trembled. "I am Charity Blossom." She didn't flinch. The name didn't break her. It steadied her. In that moment, the facade of Marion became her armor. Charity's resurrection was her sword. She touched the scar behind her ear gently. "You survived what they planned to end you. You don't need permission to return," she murmured. Her eyes didn't just reflect memory. They burned with resolve. She was done hiding behind initials, dates, and disguises. She would re-enter their world not with a scream, but with a signature. That afternoon, she arrived at Blossom Group's legal division earlier than usual, dressed in a sharp gray blazer and silk blouse, her confidence unsettling even her superior. During a department review meeting, Jerry walked in unexpectedly to address the team about compliance issues. He scanned the room, briefly locking eyes with her. A flicker confusion. Recognition? She didn't blink. She jotted notes, tilted her head slightly, then looked away like he was no more important than an ink blot. He paused, but only for a second. Afterward, he spoke to his assistant. "Who's the new girl?" "Marion Otakba," the assistant replied. "Legal department. Very efficient." "Why?" Jerry didn't respond, just kept staring at the closed door she'd walked through. Later that night, Marion sat by her window as Christopher poured tea. "You didn't flinch today," he said. She sipped. "Because the game has begun. And now, I'm choosing the rules." Charity, now fully operating under the name Marion, began weaving herself into Jerry's orbit like a breeze no one noticed until it shifted the entire room. She volunteered for case reviews that crossed into executive oversight, strategically placed herself at legal briefings Jerry occasionally attended, and dropped just enough insightful comments to make her seem irreplaceable. One afternoon during a compliance review, Jerry leaned forward, curious. "You're not like most interns," he remarked. "Sharp eyes," Marion offered a smile, warm but distant. "I like to understand the foundation before I accept what's built on top of it." He chuckled, amused but also intrigued. There was something oddly magnetic about her poise, her refusal to be charmed by him. Later that day, he requested a private consult on a pending merger document. She agreed, knowing it would open a door, one he wouldn't know she'd crafted herself. In that meeting, she arrived exactly 3 minutes late, just enough to seem busy but not disrespectful. Jerry gestured toward the chair beside him, sipping black coffee. "You're one of the few people around here who speaks like they mean it," he said. She tilted her head. "Maybe I've had to survive too much to waste words." He paused. "Survive what?" She glanced at him with a guarded softness. "That's a long story. Maybe one day, if we both survive this company, I'll tell you." Jerry stared a beat too long. Something about her voice, it wasn't just her intellect. It was how she carried a quiet sadness wrapped in steel. The same paradox he once saw in Charity. That night, Jerry told Tanya over dinner, "There's a new intern in legal. I don't know what it is, but she reminds me of someone. Tanya didn't even raise her fork. Everyone reminds you of something when you're looking for ghosts. But she marked the name mentally. And the next day, she instructed HR for Marion Otakba's full background file. Something was off. Tanya didn't know what yet, but she intended to find it. The cracks between Jerry and Tanya, long painted over with media smiles and expensive gifts, began to widen. It started with silence, Jerry spending more time in his office than at home, Tanya waking up alone more often than not. Then came the snapping. "You didn't tell me you invited her to your executive lunch," she accused one morning, holding a schedule printout. "Who?" Jerry asked lazily. "That Marion girl. Why is she suddenly involved in frontline deals?" He shrugged. "She's smart, efficient, and not insecure." Tanya flinched. "You think I'm jealous?" "After everything we've built." Jerry's voice grew colder. "What we built started on a lie, Tan. Maybe the foundation's crumbling." Tanya's face flushed. "Don't forget who was holding your hand when the world started believing you." He threw down his napkin. "Oh, I haven't. I remember every hand that pushed." The next day, Tanya stormed into HR and demanded a private meeting. "You approved her background check, right?" she pressed. "Yes, clean file. References cross-verified," the manager replied. But that wasn't enough. Tanya hired a private investigator that same evening. Meanwhile, Christopher, playing his own quiet game, leaked edited footage of one of Tanya's old shareholder meetings, where she had smirked during a heated audit scandal involving Charity's father's legacy funds. The clip circulated quickly across business forums and social media platforms. Hashtags like unfit to lead and Blossom Secrets trended for hours. Tanya confronted Jerry, phone in hand. "Do you see what they're doing to me? You think this is coincidence?" He looked up from his desk slowly. "Maybe it's karma." Tanya's voice cracked. "If you're trying to humiliate me, just say it." Jerry stood and walked toward the window. "I don't need to. You're unraveling on your own." What neither of them realized was that the very intern tearing them apart wasn't just a stranger with ambition, she was the corpse they buried. And she was only getting started. While Jerry and Tanya wrestled with their slow implosion, Charity quietly turned her attention to the boardroom battleground, the very place where Blossom's future could be rewritten without a single public scandal. With Christopher's help, she discreetly acquired shares through proxy investors, older stakeholders who had once supported her late father, but had been muscled out after her disappearance. She visited them in quiet homes, dressed simply, armed with forged documents, new strategies, and a hint of vulnerability. "Blossom used to stand for legacy," she'd tell them. "Now it stands for betrayal and gloss." Her passion won them over. Bit by bit, shares that once seemed dormant shifted hands into the possession of her discreet holding company, Lanther Equity, fronted by a silent nominee. No one tied the sudden buyouts back to Marion. On the day Blossom's quarterly financials were due, Charity walked past the investor relations team as they scrambled over a suspicious pattern. A rising block of voting shares accumulating under a name no one recognized. Jerry entered the strategy meeting late, preoccupied with whispers he hadn't yet confirmed. Tanya, pale and unusually quiet, handed him a printout. "Do you see this? This firm, Lanther Equity, they've bought 11% of our holdings in 2 months. That's not normal," Jerry squinted. "Who's behind it?" She shook her head. "Nobody knows. They won't take meetings. Just signatures." Charity, sitting quietly across the table with a pen in her hand, glanced at the chart and scribbled a note in her planner. 12% by next week. Silent thunder is still thunder. As the executives debated, she looked up at Jerry and smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just deeply, unnervingly calm. The type of calm that belongs only to someone with nothing left to lose and everything left to reclaim. A parcel arrived at Tanya's office just before noon, no name, no stamp, hand-delivered. Her assistant placed it on her desk with a nervous shrug. It was in the lobby, left by a man in a helmet. He disappeared before security could question him. Tanya hesitated, palms already damp. She opened the plain box carefully, peeling back the soft brown tissue paper inside. What she found made her freeze. A framed note on aged stationery, written in a hand she recognized instantly. "Till death do us part. But death is not the end. Her blood turned to ice. She gripped the frame with trembling fingers, reading it again and again, as if the words would morph into something else. But no, the cursive slant, the pressure of the strokes, it was unmistakably Charity's handwriting. "No," she whispered, backing away. This isn't possible." She rushed to Jerry's office, slammed the frame onto his desk, and shouted, "This was on my table. She wrote this, Jerry. I know that handwriting." Jerry looked at it, his face darkening. "Where did it come from?" "It was left downstairs." "No fingerprints, nothing," Tanya choked. Jerry leaned back, visibly shaken. "She's dead," he said, less certain than before. "We burned her dress. We saw her fall." Tanya stared at him, voice cracking. "Then why do I feel like she's watching us? Why does everything feel like a setup?" Jerry rubbed his temples, then stood. "We need to act normal, no press reaction. No internal panic. This wedding happens. Do you hear me? We finish what we started." Tanya nodded numbly, but the frame still sat between them like an open grave. Across the city, Charity stood in a crowded cafe, watching livestock reports on a muted TV. She sipped her tea with a steady hand, her lips curling into a half-smile. "They've seen the writing," she murmured to Christopher, seated beside her. "Now let's see if they can read between the lines." The city buzzed with whispers of the wedding of the year, as journalists, influencers, and business elites descended on Blossom Tower for the pre-wedding gala. Floral arrangements spilled out of glass vases in the lobby, and luxury cars lined the entrance like ornaments. Marian walked among them in a pearl-toned jumpsuit, her hair swept into a chignon, no makeup except a deep nude lip. She was invisible in plain sight, weaving through press assistants and caterers without so much as a second glance. "Are you sure you want to be here?" Christopher asked quietly, straightening his black tie. "There's still time to disappear before tomorrow." Marian didn't answer immediately. She stopped near a bouquet of white orchids, her fingers brushing one lightly. "You don't get to walk out of a grave twice," she whispered. "I need them to see me before they see me." Inside the ballroom, Jerry held Tanya's waist tightly as they posed for photographers. Smiles were exchanged, compliments poured in. But the glimmer in Jerry's eyes was off, dimmed with distraction. He had barely slept the night before, tossing in bed with visions of handwritten notes and a pair of eyes he couldn't forget. Tanya, meanwhile, had taken 2 sedatives just to get through the morning. Her laughter came too sharp, her movements too precise. "Smile wider," a photographer directed. "Think of your future." She bared her teeth like a pageant queen, then hissed at Jerry through her teeth. "You better not flinch tomorrow." He didn't respond. He was too busy scanning the crowd, searching for a presence he couldn't name. In the far corner, Marian lingered near a waiter, casually lifting a glass of sparkling water. She locked eyes with Jerry for a split second, no recognition. But something inside him jolted. "Did you see her?" he muttered. Tanya blinked. "See who?" He turned back, but Marian was already gone, leaving only the faint scent of lilies and the beginning of dread. Tanya's phone buzzed at 5:44 a.m. the next morning with a push notification she hadn't expected. "Who's really getting married today?" "The bride returns." Her heart stopped. She tapped the link, fingers shaking. An anonymous blog had surfaced with cryptic phrases. "Not every bride wears white. Not every grave holds truth. When the veil lifts, secrets will scream." Images accompanied it, glitched stills from security footage that vaguely resembled Charity's rooftop fall. "No, no, no," Tanya murmured, jumping out of bed. She burst into the bathroom, slapping water on her face. "It's a stunt. Some journalist with too much time." But her voice lacked conviction. She rushed to Jerry, who was already on the phone barking at their PR director. "Clean it. Wipe the tags. Threaten to sue for defamation," he snapped. When he hung up, he turned to her. "It's beginning. She's turning our day into a battleground." "She's dead," Tanya shouted, fists clenched. "She has to be." Jerry's eyes were bloodshot. "I used to believe that, but now." He pointed at the screen. "I don't know what to believe." Tanya slumped onto the bed, her silk robe falling off one shoulder. "We shouldn't have done it," she whispered. "We should have let her walk away. We didn't have to end her." Jerry's face turned stony. "We did what we had to. Now we survive it." But it was already too late for survival. Guests had begun arriving. News vans were assembling outside. the weight of a perfect day pressed against walls built on treachery. Across town, Charity stood before a mirror in a cream satin dress, simple, regal, untouched by time. She stared at her reflection and whispered, "They'll see me today, but not just my face. They'll see the ghost they created." Behind her, Christopher adjusted his tie and opened the door. "Ready?" She nodded once. "Let's go end a wedding." The ceremony began in the Grand Blossom Atrium, a cathedral-style venue adorned with cascading chandeliers and ivory floral arches. Guests were already seated, whispering behind fans and designer sunglasses, most unaware that the room was already cracked beneath the surface. A harpist played softly as Jerry stood at the altar in a tailored black tuxedo, shifting nervously on his feet. Tanya, glowing under layers of makeup, appeared at the double doors in a custom beaded gown, veil draped like mist across her face. The moment was poised for perfection. The officiant cleared his throat. "Please rise," he declared. The audience stood. But before the bride could take her first step, the doors swung open again behind her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A second woman entered, graceful, calm, dressed in cream satin, with her chin lifted and her gaze fixed. Tanya turned around slowly, veil trembling. Her bouquet slipped from her hands. The woman walked forward, her heels echoing with authority. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice echoing across the hall, "but this wedding cannot continue." Silence followed like a held breath. Jerry's mouth opened, but no sound came. The officiant blinked in confusion. "And you are—" She stepped forward and unfolded a single sheet of paper. "Charity Blossom," she said clearly, lifting her eyes to meet Jerry's. "And this is my death certificate, the one you both fabricated." The paper fluttered in her hand as cameras flashed and people gasped. "I didn't die. I was silenced. But today, I speak." Tanya stumbled backward, her face drained of color. You can't be." Charity stepped closer. "You watched me fall, but you forgot something." Her eyes burned. I knew how to rise. A chorus of gasps drowned out the soft harp music as Charity's words echoed through the atrium like a lightning strike in still air. The reporters surged forward. Phones were raised. The world was watching. Jerry's face turned ashen, sweat beading on his forehead as he tried to maintain composure. This is some sick game," he said, voice trembling. "Security," he barked, but no one moved. They too were stunned, frozen by the revelation unraveling in real time. Charity turned toward the guests, her voice unwavering. "The company you now celebrate was built on blood, on betrayal. I was buried alive by these two. But what they didn't kill was my truth." Murmurs turned into shouts. Board members whispered urgently, already pulling out their phones. Tanya tore off her veil, her chest rising and falling erratically. "You're dead. You were." "Left to drown," Charity cut in, her tone sharpened like steel. "But I swam." Her eyes flicked to Jerry. "And you watched. You said nothing. You did nothing. You signed documents using my name, forged power of attorney, transferred my father's company into your hands." She turned to the crowd again. "There are recordings, witnesses, asset trails, and now, there's me." Christopher emerged from the side aisle holding a tablet already streaming evidence to a private news network. The screen showed images, voice notes, timelines. Every lie laid bare. The officiant took a step back, clearly shaken. "This wedding is void," he said awkwardly. "It cannot proceed under these circumstances." Charity locked eyes with Tanya one final time. "I was the bride once, and now I'm the verdict." The silence that followed was heavier than the truth itself. Tanya collapsed to her knees, her gown pooling around her like the ruins of a shattered crown. "You can't do this," she sobbed, eyes darting from guest to guest. "You can't take everything back." Charity stood over her, calm but unsparing. "I'm not taking it back," she said quietly. "I'm reclaiming what you stole." Jerry made a move toward the aisle, but Christopher blocked his path, holding up a voice recorder. "Recognize this?" he asked, pressing play. Jerry's voice filled the room, desperate and damning. "If she doesn't fall, you do it. She needs to disappear tonight." "Tanya, don't back out now." Gasps turned to outcries. A woman near the front dropped her champagne flute. A man in a navy suit whispered. She was telling the truth all along. The unraveling was complete. Suddenly the side doors opened, and two plain-clothed officers stepped in. "Jeremiah Carson," Tanya bellowed. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and corporate conspiracy," one announced. The guests began filming. Jerry backed away, but Christopher didn't flinch. "Don't run," he muttered. She didn't. Tanya clutched Jerry's arm, shrieking, "Fix this! Fix it!" But Jerry could barely stand. The weight of exposure, shame, and guilt buckled him. As the officers led them out, Charity turned to the guests once more. "You don't have to believe in ghosts. Just believe in justice." The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then thunderous, until the sound of cuffs clicking replaced the music meant for a wedding. There was no need for flowers, vows, or rings. The truth was the ceremony, and today it stood crowned. 3 weeks after the wedding day collapse, the nation was glued to their screens. Courtrooms had become theaters, and Jerry and Tanya were now the faces of betrayal in every newspaper headline. The prosecution wasted no time, beginning with a lineup of damning evidence. Forged signatures, unauthorized asset transfers, and most damning of all, voice recordings tied to Charity's attempted murder. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with journalists, legal analysts, and former Blossom shareholders who wanted justice served. Charity sat near the front, dignified in a navy blue suit, her eyes unreadable. She didn't flinch as the footage of her rooftop fall was played, nor when Jerry's panicked voice filled the room again. What broke the silence was the collective gasp when her medical reports were introduced. She survived the fall, the burns, and the coma while they spent her inheritance, the prosecutor said. The judge nodded grimly. "Proceed." Tanya, no longer composed or camera-ready, broke down on the stand. "I didn't mean to kill her," she sobbed. She was always in the way. I loved him." Her mascara ran down her cheeks like spilled ink. Jerry, on the other hand, remained stone-faced. When asked if he felt remorse, he replied coldly. She was weak. The company needed someone ruthless. The courtroom murmured in disbelief. Charity leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on him. "You didn't just betray me," she said quietly, requesting to speak. "You buried the best parts of me and called it progress. But nothing that begins with blood can grow without rot." The judge granted her the last word before sentencing. She stood unwavering. "You stole years from me. But what I reclaimed was more than time, it was clarity. And that you'll never taste again." The judge sentenced them both to lengthy prison terms, Jerry for 25 years with no parole, Tanya for 18. As they were led away, Jerry turned one last time, but Charity had already looked away. His chapter was closed. Days after the verdict, Charity sat in her father's old study, a room she hadn't entered since before the betrayal. Dust lined the shelves, and the scent of aged leather and forgotten ink clung to the curtains. A private legal advisor, Mr. Cudi, now retired, had reached out to her discreetly. "Your father left a second will," he said, placing a sealed envelope in her hand. He kept it hidden. For protection, he feared what Jerry might do. Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal. The letter inside was written in her father's careful cursive. "To my daughter, Charity Blossom. In the event of any foul play, this letter should serve as confirmation. The entirety of Blossom Group belongs to you. Any other document is void." Her breath hitched. She turned to Christopher. "He knew, even before I did." Christopher nodded. He saw them for who they were. "You were just the last to believe it." With the will validated in court, Charity was reinstated as CEO of Blossom Group without contest. The media coverage was relentless, painting her as a phoenix who rose from betrayal with both elegance and fire. But her first executive order shocked everyone. She halted all public appearances, refused interviews, and focused solely on internal restructuring. "This company doesn't need a spectacle," she told the board. "It needs rebuilding." Employees who had once tiptoed around her now looked at her with quiet admiration. She reinstated retired executives her father had trusted, dissolved all lingering accounts opened by Jerry, and launched an audit of every department. One morning during a quiet moment, Blossom, her cousin and former PR lead, approached her. "You've changed," she said softly. Charity looked up, fingers laced. "I had to die to figure out how to live." Blossom nodded. "And now," Charity smiled faintly, "now I lead, not with vengeance, but with vision." And for the first time, the office didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like hers again. The prison was stark and quiet when Charity arrived, escorted by a silent guard. She wore no makeup, no armor, just a long gray coat and soft flats. "Inmate Carson has agreed to see you," the guard said as he opened the door. Jerry looked different. His once polished frame had shrunk beneath a faded jumpsuit. The moment he saw her, he stood slowly, shame etched into every line of his face. "You actually came," he said, voice hoarse. "You didn't have to." Charity sat across from him, folding her hands neatly on the table. "No, I didn't. But I needed to see the man who helped kill me. Not to hurt him, but to let him know I'm not broken anymore." Jerry's eyes glistened. "I made mistakes." "No," she interrupted softly. "You made choices." He swallowed hard. "I loved you once. You loved power more," she finished for him. "And you chose it every time." Jerry's shoulders slumped. "I see her in my dreams, not the Charity in the dress, the one who was screaming when I looked away." For a moment, the silence pressed heavy between them. Then she leaned forward. "I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I do. Carrying your darkness isn't my burden anymore." He nodded, lips trembling. "Thank you." She stood, looking down at him. "But forgiveness doesn't mean return. Don't mistake my healing for softness." As the guard returned to escort her out, Jerry called after her. "Do you think I'll ever make peace with myself?" She paused, hand on the door. "Only if you stop lying to yourself." She didn't look back. Tanya, whom she visited later that day, couldn't even speak. Her silence was her own prison. Charity walked out into the sunlight, blinking up at the sky. The past was ashes, but she had become the flame. The Blossom Group boardroom was quiet that morning. No camera flashes, no shareholder drama, no champagne glasses raised in celebration. Just Charity, seated at the head of the table in a crisp ivory pantsuit, her fingers resting lightly on a leather-bound folder marked Final Transition Proposal. Around the table sat Blossom's most trusted executives, her cousin Blossom, Mr. Cootie, and two newly appointed department heads who had proven loyal through the storm. She cleared her throat gently. 3 years ago, I was supposed to walk into this company as a wife. I returned as a witness, and now, I choose to leave as a woman who finally knows who she is. Murmurs rippled, confused. She opened the folder and slid a signed letter forward. "Effective immediately, I will be stepping down as CEO." Gasps erupted. Blossom leaned forward, stunned. "Charity, you've rebuilt this company. Why walk away now?" Charity smiled genuinely, peacefully. "Because survival taught me how to fight. But healing taught me how to let go." She turned to Blossom, placing a hand over hers. "You've been my anchor since the day I came back. I trust you to lead not with noise, but with clarity." Tears shimmered in her cousin's eyes. "I'm honored," she whispered, "but we're going to miss you." Charity stood, gathering the few personal items she kept in the office. A photo of her father, a crystal pen, and a small orchid plant that never stopped blooming. "I won't be far," she said, "but I want to start something else, something of my own. Quiet, honest, purposeful." As she walked out of the building, the entire staff stood along the corridor, clapping, not out of protocol, but respect. Not one word was spoken. She nodded graciously, then stepped into the open air. Christopher waited by the car, leaning casually against the door. "So," he said with a small smile, "what now?" Charity slipped on her sunglasses. "Now, we live, not to prove anything, just to breathe." The rooftop was quieter than she remembered. No wind screamed, no shadows loomed. Just the soft hush of the city moving below as Charity stepped out slowly, her heels echoing on the concrete. She wore a pale blue dress, the fabric soft against her skin, her hair loose and tucked behind one ear. This time, there were no secrets waiting at the edge, only closure. She approached the very spot she once fell from, now bordered by reinforced rails and freshly painted lines. Christopher stood behind her at a respectful distance, hands in his pockets. "I never thought you'd come back here," he said gently. She turned slightly. "I had to," she replied. "Not for revenge, not even for answers. Just to show the space it didn't win." She crouched and placed a folded letter on the ground, sealed and addressed simply. "To the woman I used to be." They stood in silence, watching as the early evening sun painted the buildings gold. "Do you ever wish none of it happened?" Christopher finally asked. Charity shook her head slowly. "No," she said, "because it taught me who I'm not, and reminded me of who I am." He offered a small nod, the kind shared by people who've walked through fire and learned to love the burn marks. She turned to him fully now, a softness in her eyes. I'm done living under old names, his wife, their victim, that woman who fell. She smiled faintly. I'm Charity Blossom. And this time, no one else wears that name. Christopher reached into his coat and handed her a small notebook, the one she'd scribbled in during her days as Marion. She took it, flipping through the pages filled with fragments of grief, rage, and reflection. Then she closed it. Time for a new story, she whispered. One I write for myself. As they walked away, the camera of life didn't zoom out dramatically. No music played, just footsteps fading into peace, into purpose, into her own. Here's the Bible verse, Isaiah 54, verse 17. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee, in judgment thou shalt condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. Why it fits. This verse captures Charity's journey perfectly. She was betrayed, buried, and nearly erased, but none of it prevailed. Her quiet return, armed not with vengeance, but with truth and resilience, proved that no plot formed against her could ultimately succeed. She rose not with rage, but with purpose, and inherited her rightful place. Moral of the story: truth buried by deceit may be delayed, but it is never destroyed. Betrayal may silence a person, but character will always resurrect them. You don't need revenge to win, you need clarity, patience, and the courage to heal on your own terms. Key takeaways: justice doesn't always roar, it often walks in quietly and finishes what pain started. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's choosing peace over poison. No matter who tries to erase you, your name, when tied to truth, will echo louder than their lies. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.